Good afternoon. My name is Lori Kirkendall. I serve as president of Medical Institute for Sexual Health. We are a science-based nonprofit public health organization. You all are tasked with approving instructional materials that will assist Texas schools in teaching their students the new health TEKS. The expanded TEKS you all adopted are strong, and their full intent and content should be upheld in this process. Additionally, all IMs approved must adhere to the laws for health education here in Texas, most of which are found in Education Code 28.004. There are 4 distinct publishers under consideration who provided 5 very different publications. These must each be evaluated separately. My comments today are specific to reproductive and sexual health. As I've referenced in comments I was previously asked to submit for you all, both Lesson B and Human Kinetics do not align with the TEKS and violate the law. I will testify again here that Quaver Ed provides lessons on puberty and reproduction that will assist classroom teachers in meeting the TEKS for 4th and 5th grade. Goodhart Wilcox went to great lengths to include the extensive, very specific language included in the 268 health TEKS for middle and high school. Both Quaver and Goodhart Wilcox must work to accommodate the new opt-in requirements of House Bill 1525, limiting student access to their content without parental permission. One comment I would make with regards to mental health content is to review carefully the TEKS and ensure that approved materials you meet all that you voted to include. Thank you all for standing firm in the ongoing debate on what children in Texas should be taught about health. We know that healthier students will produce healthier Texas families and communities. Thank you.
And we'll take any questions from members for this group. I'll start with Ms. Hardy and then Dr. Robinson.
Yes, thank you for all of you for the work you've done to give us some guidance in regard to the books. And I know it was very much a labor of love and appreciation for the opportunity in Texas that we really like to hear from the community and the teachers and the parents. One of the things I wanted to ask, this would be for Lori and Kylene, as y'all might know this, how many schools in Texas have a separate, through their shacks, go through a separate training thing for their sex education? In other words, they wouldn't be using the textbooks. They would be doing this as a program like Worth the Wait or something like that. Standalone programs, yeah. Thank you.
Well, as you know, there are 1,200 school districts in the state. Every district is a little bit different, or maybe a lot different on the shack issue. I've worked with many of them. So given the new requirements of shack regulations in House Bill 1525, hopefully we're going to up the game of all the shacks, particularly timely with the new TEKS coming effective next school year. So I think that's all part of the process of what needs to happen to uphold local control and parent involvement and opt-in transparency and all of those really important factors. But I don't know exactly how many are using them. Certainly that would still be within their purview to do so, as those curriculum decisions will still be at the local school district level. Hence the increased requirements around transparency and parental input and review and adoption by the boards that is needed to uphold not just the TEKS, but the local community values as in statute.
When they do most of those programs, they do bring in counselors and nurses. Am I correct in saying that?
I think that happens a lot. I think the counselors and nurses, the health teachers themselves, sometimes another academic area do the instruction to meet the TEKS. As you know, through 8th grade now, we have these expanded health TEKS, and I think that will look different in every district to where those TEKS are put in, whether some districts take their own middle school health course and offer it, or it's a part of another subject, of course, even more down at the elementary levels to get all of those new health TEKS taught.
So, Kylene, do you have it?
Well, I would say that some of these schools do bring in outsiders as well, and I think that the schools are going to need some guidance. Not all of them seem to be aware of this new opt-in requirement, and it's different even from before in that now parents have access to the grievance process. If they're not aware, the parents have to be not only provided notice, but it has to be 2 weeks out, and then they have to get consent. So I think it's going to be a learning process, and I don't know, I've never known anyone that kept statistics on that. Even the whole Worth the Wait program has changed, and the management, the leadership of that, so I don't know that they even have stats. It certainly has been through the years one of the most popular, and of course it has 2 segments, and some schools opt to use the contraceptive program that is separate and would, obviously be a little bit more controversial. It's less controversial than some programs, but I've never seen anyone track statistics on that.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, the question for Ms. Kuykendall. Thanks for being here and providing testimony. I know a year ago, over 2 separate meetings, we spent a lot of time discussing, debating on the health TEKS revisions, and you provided a lot of good factual information and on all that. Regarding Goodhart-Willcox and Quaver Ed, do you feel, in your professional opinion, as with the Masters in Public Health, that those 2 textbooks go beyond, to any significant degree, what we approved with the health TEKS revisions a year ago?
Thank you for the question. I think that Goodhart-Willcox, particularly for middle school and high school, went to great lengths. You'll notice exact language from the TEKS that were adopted, incorporated into their numbers of different kinds of activities and learning modalities in that particular instructional material. The particular topics that you all decided not to include in the TEKS are not included to any great degree that I've seen in Goodhart-Willcox. Quaver Ed is for elementary K through 5, just has a couple of lessons in their special topics that could be utilized to meet the TEKS in 4th and 5th grade.
While you're there, same sort of topic, and any of the other rest of you, if you want to comment as well on this. I noticed in Lesson B, there's reference to national standards from CECAS, New York State standards, and Illinois standards. In your view, how do those kind of interact, or are they the same as the Texas standards, the TEKS that this board did last year? Are those very different? Kind of, what do you comment about those?
There are 2 different national standards that are referenced in some of the supporting documentation around those publications. So one of them is the NHES, National Health Education Standards. The NHES provide for 8 standards that must be taught, really more skills and knowledge based around a number of health topics. The second publication that is often referenced also is called the National Sexuality Education Standards, NSES, a collaborative called the Future of Sex Education, which involved a number of national organizations, including CECAS that you referenced, went together on NSES. Illinois and New York also are referenced. I'm just going to tell you that Texas is Texas, and we take great pride in being different than these other states, as I have let a number of local school districts understand also. The NSES, the National Sex Education Standards, were never ratified by any particular national education governing body, and they conflict with the law in Texas. So you wouldn't want to reference NSES in Texas schools around Education Code 28004.
I've got a couple of questions, and Debbie, I've got some questions specifically for you. I appreciate everyone's work they did. Debbie, I spent a lot of time going over the material that you sent us. Very thorough documents through all this. But I had some specific questions. I want to start on Goodhart-Willcox. The information you sent us talked about how the reviewers object to the content, specifically on page 583 in middle school, which talks about, do you know how to get testing for STIs? Do you know what resources offer testing for HIV? Are you aware of PREP and PEP reducing the risk of HIV transmission? So we have that in the TEKS on 23F. So I guess my question is, how would you recommend that this is taught? I do believe that PREP and PEP is probably taught in the instructional material to a greater degree than needs to be. But those other issues, how would you recommend that those standards be taught in the instructional material?
That's a really good question. It's probably a great question for people who have been certified in sexual risk avoidance as specialists. It's been my observation that when I look at a sexual risk avoidance program, it does not go into that much detail. And the direction that is always placed on the children.
Can I ask a real quick
is
question on that point right there? Are
Sure.
you saying that for all of those or just for the PRP and the PREP?
For just the general subject, it's obvious with Goodhart-Willcox that it was not written by sexual risk avoidance specialists. Had it been, you would have seen the primary health model of risk avoidance, and that students that are engaging in these risky behaviors should be moved to the primary health model of avoiding the risks, and they should also be directed to their parents. And so it was really interesting because as many times as it talks about testing and STIs and the problems there, there's very little mention of parents and the concerns there about the risky behavior that the children are engaging in.
Okay. Some of these questions may be along the same line, but also on page 591, you pointed out that 2 of the most effective methods for preventing STIs include sexual abstinence and the use of condoms. Now, the new TEKS require barrier protection and other contraceptive methods to be taught. So kind of same question on barrier method. How would you recommend that that's taught, and that specifically TEK in 7th and 8th grade 23L?
Right. So the answer is the same, that a sexual risk avoidance program would first address the fact that children are engaging in risky behavior and attempt to move them to a risk avoidance situation. The way that it's worded in Goodhart-Willcox consistently is that they're equal and that abstinence is merely a method of contraception.
Okay. I've got 2 more examples I just wanted to get your opinion on because, like I said, we went through this in some good detail. For Health 1 and Health 2 on page 469, you objected to where it says the passage about lately some of your friends who are dating have started talking about becoming sexually active, so that everyone in a serious dating relationship has sex. We do have TEKS also about refusal skills, and when you look at the rest of that statement right there, it's about making the decision to wait. I guess my question, I feel somehow that some of the content that you put in there, when you look at the full context, it is in an abstinence section. But when you have a section there that just brings in that quote, do you feel that in the full context of those statements that it is more in an abstinence-based piece of information than maybe what your information led to?
I don't remember that exact example, nor do I remember which lesson it's in. If it's in the abstinence, the 7 pages of abstinence, that would be a specific section that concentrates on abstinence. Throughout the rest of the text, you don't see those types of messages lacing through. Again, abstinence is presented equally with contraception methods. So refusal skills, whether it's sexual risk or any risky behavior, should always be directing the children back to avoiding those risky behaviors. And so we want to see more of a conversation around risky behavior without normalizing sexual activity among children. And that's what some of those examples tend to do, is it normalizes that all children are having sex, or many children in your peer groups. It positions it as it's a normal behavior, and we want to move children away from that.
Okay. There's my last example. I think it's along those same lines too. On page 506, it talks about healthy dating relationships should include honest communication about physical intimacy, including sexual activity. Again, when you look at that in the whole context, I think it is in an abstinence-based section, but the little phrase you pick out doesn't necessarily show that. So now let me open this question up to all 4 of y'all. When we've received a lot of communication, there's a lot of communication that's saying reject all 4 textbooks. We've received additional communication that's saying to adopt Goodhart-Willcox and Quaver Ed. The State Board of Education adopted list, as different than it was in the past, is not required for a district to use that list. You know, many years ago, that if a book wasn't on the State Board adopted list, essentially it probably wasn't a book that was going to end up in classrooms. That's different now, that districts can still purchase a book that's not on our list, as I know all of you know. So my question that I want to ask y'all, and for anyone to chime in on, is if the State Board of Education did adopt no instructional material for health, would you feel what kind of vacuum that would lead to? And if there was a vacuum there, districts are going to need to find some material. I think as history has shown that most districts purchase material off the state board adopted list. So the concern is that it creates a vacuum, and that at that point in time, if we have what there's been testimony that we've received communication to specifically for Good Heart, Wilcox, and Quaver, an adequate book, a good book, are they going to go find something else that might be, maybe in your eyes, much worse than what we have here? So that's a question for all four.
Well, of course, we are not recommending that you reject all of the books, and we do appreciate the guidance of this board and the process of having stakeholders and parents and teachers and other professionals and paraprofessionals being able to weigh in and give you information. So we do appreciate that process. All of these risks are there. I do think that having the guidance of the board is better than a complete vacuum, but I guess for us with the state board, not the state boards, but the local boards having to approve curricula and being subject to the voters, and with the parent opt-in process, there are a lot more protections in place for our kids. But definitely we do appreciate this board's work on that. And we understand that you do it for a lot of criticism, a lot of unpaid work. So we appreciate it, and we do see the value in it, yes.
I would like to challenge the idea that we would give any competitive advantage to a program that is not the best program. School districts that want to adopt radical sex education or radical programs are going to do that. When you look at these programs as a whole, the pervasiveness, not just in the sex education, but throughout the entire text, the health tracking, the surveys, everything about them, if the State Board of Education adopts them and puts them on a list, then that will give a competitive advantage to these programs. What happens to those the sexual risk avoidance specialists in your neighborhoods, in your areas? That disadvantages them. They won't win the business. They won't win the opportunity to get into the classrooms, because the school districts are going to want to choose what's on the instructional list. And so my point is that we can't look at the market as these are the best options, or, oh, well, this is all we could get. I actually think it would disadvantage some of the very good programs that are possible out there. It's an economic perspective.
I tend to agree with her. Ultimately, providing a list of only just 4 references with lots of this stuff, that if it were written by, say, a medical professional for the mental health stuff that I was speaking about, it would present it differently. It wouldn't create all of the problems there. And so I think it does advantage each school district to decide on their own and think of other solutions.
I'll take the opportunity to speak to the issue of local control still is absolutely in place with whatever decision this board makes. It still has to go through the new regulations and adoption requirements set forth by House Bill 1525. So that still supersedes whatever you all vote or select on. The other part I would say is just to consider, as I said in my testimony, each of the publications very differently. They are unique. And Quaver Ed for K through 5 is very different than the middle school curriculum of Lesson B, and Human Kinetics, ultimately very different than the very extensive, kind of more traditional formatting of Goodhart Wilcox and the extensive content they included to meet all your TEKS. We have already had schools asking us, how are we going to teach all of this? And they're going to need guidance, and I think part of this approval process is to give them that guidance, and yet they still have the opportunity to choose things that reflect their local community values back in their districts.
So do you have concerns that if we adopted no books on where districts would go purchase instructional material for?
I do. I do have that concern because 1,200 school districts, some of them have, I think the smallest has about 86 students in it, and some have 20 or 30,000, I think our biggest one. So when you're looking at 1,200 school districts to just sort of leave it all to them, I think they look to you all for that guidance.
Thank you. Dr. Young, Ms. Hardy?
Lori?
You're welcome. So, I had the joy of being over the shack at Nacogdoches ISD. Tons of fun. And so, explain to us then what the purpose of shack is, and them reviewing this information and making recommendations to the board at the end of each school year. And how this correlates or does not correlate to that responsibility of the shack, which is a requirement for all 1,200 school districts in the state.
Thank you. A question regarding really 28.004 in the formation of the shack and the role of the shack. That was clarified in House Bill 1525 along some of the shack requirements and now the opt-in requirement as well. The regulations by which those meetings would be run, the transparency and involvement for the adoption process, which was really good timing now that every school district must be looking at health curriculum this year to go into place for next August. So my answer to that is they're still looking for resources and guidance and still have to go through the local community values test that the shacks put in place. So by giving the TEA, State Board of Education, adopted materials as a possibility, I think that allows them to pick that up, review it through their local community values and their shack, and get it in place for the August implementation. I think that's how I understood your question.
Yes, and just for the edification of those in the room, who all is required to be on the shack committee?
Well, as you know, the board itself in the local district must appoint at least 5 members to the shack. The language of 28.004 lists off a whole host of possibilities, including clergy members, senior citizens, nonprofit health organizations, and a number of such. It's intended to have a majority of parents who are parents with children in the district who are not employees of the district. And I will tell you from my experience with working probably over 60 different shacks, that's different everywhere. But I think the new legislation in place will continue to up the game, as I would say, of local shacks.
So basically, the shack committee could then fact check our recommendation.
Absolutely, it would be upon them to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Bill Meadow has not asked a question yet.
Thank you for being here. I did want to ask what kinds of research you had done to look at where in the world people seem to be having effectiveness in lowering incidence of STIs and teen pregnancies, because the United States, of course, has the highest rate of teen pregnancies and STIs of any industrialized nation in the world. And so I would like to understand how you view moving from an abstinence-based sex education to making sex education opt-in. How do you think that will affect our numbers or our performance as compared to other nations in the world? I'm anybody who wants to tackle that one.
Well, I will say that we have improved our numbers in Texas over the years. And what we found in other countries when different things happened and their sex education programs had to be suspended for periods of time for whatever reason, all the bad numbers went down, not up. And we're not moving away from an abstinence-based program to opt-in. It's still an abstinence-based program. We're just giving people more information. And as a mother of 4 sons, I can tell you that whenever a note went home with my sons, it inevitably was found 3 months later shoved between the car seats along with some kind of apple core. And I was very diligent and very much worked to oversee these things, but it was difficult to always get it. And so this puts the onus on teachers to make sure that parents know and are approving, if not even invested in the situation. So we look for it to be an improvement. Everywhere I've seen where we have districts going outside of the law, We never hear them talk about a reduction in pregnancy. We sometimes hear them talk about a reduction in teen births, which suggests that we're solving the problem with abortion and not reducing teen pregnancy. Because to reduce teen pregnancy, we have to get away, as Ms. Simmons said, and move towards a sexual risk avoidance and trying to instill this value in kids. This is the ultimate make your healthy choices lessons, whether it's about food or sexuality or drugs. It's the same message. It's choosing a healthy option. And if people want to go beyond abstinence, they need to work to change things in the legislature.
My point of view is very simple. I think anything that is opt-in, opt-out is very helpful because in my experience, when a parent opts out of something, they often give their own education in place of that, which is very helpful. So that's my opinion on that.
I'm sorry, but my understanding is that now parents have to opt in to having their children have sex education, that the default will be to not have sex education in schools.
Yeah, so again, either way, whatever it is, I believe that it's the parents' choice to, and they should educate every child and prepare them for their further formative years, you know, in college and all of that. So I think that any of that is helpful because it does push it on to the parents where it does belong.
Any other questions, Dr. Bellmeyer? Got it. All right, anyone else who hasn't asked a question first time around? It's your first time, right, Ms. Pettis?
Not everybody on the panel of 4 has expressed this, but a couple of you have, and so I'm wondering what your better or replacement recommendation might be. You express concern about students not talking to their parents, or that the book doesn't go specifically into, please speak to your parents. And coming from a perspective of multiple school districts in the 1,200 school districts, there are several thousands of Texas students who don't have parents. So who would they go to?
The simple answer is that just like the law, they should be going to parents or legal guardians. And these materials don't direct them to either.
All right, just as a note, we haven't had this come up yet, but as a general rule that we have at the State Board of Education, we don't have any outburst or anything from the public. There has been times past when members of the public wanted to express support of what's said. I think a former board member called it jazz hands, where you raise your hands up. So if you have something that you want to support the speaker, please use that as opposed to applause. Thank you.
I wanted to address the opt-in if I could. The opt-in helps ensure that parents know the content their children will be receiving. It would absolutely apply to a parent or legal guardian. Just like if they're going to take a field trip to the zoo, they have to get a permission slip. So it kind of values that involvement for every child in the school. But the State Board of Education, when you all worked on the health TEKS, were very intentional in writing parents ahead of or trusted adults. And I think the intent is that every place where we can, we would want to keep that same language and priority on parents. There's a couple of spots, I've got some examples in Goodhart Wilcox where maybe that exact sentence doesn't have trusted adults, but the one before does and the one after does. So again, I would testify that Goodhart Wilcox went to great lengths to include lots of places of lots of the exact language. So again, the recommendation is make sure the TEKS are covered in anything you adopt.
You know, health is more than just sex education. And so I was going to question the Quaver is the one that has the elementary stuff that's, you know, other stuff. What I'm concerned about is it's a very expensive program. And right now, in a great majority of our schools, they're not even teaching the 4 core subjects, or not doing them to the degree they need to be done. Social studies is virtually not taught in the elementary schools. And so how much of this health curriculum do you envision being taught in those elementary schools, even after a school district pays? I personally don't think that the virtual way of teaching is the best way, and I think this is an all virtual program. But the thing about it is, after having studied these books, do you think that the teacher needs this guidance of this kind of material for the K through 5?
Quaver Ed is an interesting product, and I'm going to call it that. It's a product. They're trying to sell something. It's laid out in 8 modules and 4 lessons each module. So it's the intention, you can tell, is that the children are to sit down at the computer for 5 to 10 minutes a day. So you have 8 modules, 4 lessons for the 4 weeks in a month, and then you have 5 daily doses. So 10 minutes each day. And it's funny because when I looked at the kindergarten, it would probably take more than a half an hour to even get it set up each time, for the children. The first thing the children do when they sit down is they are to go into the health tracker and log an emoji that reflects their mood for the day. And then the teacher can assign like journaling. It depends on the different things, whether it's meditation, whether it's an active game like vaccination tag, whether it's a head lice matching card game. It's all video game structure, or maybe some interactive things in the day, but these 5 daily doses would be throughout the week. So every single day of the year, it's expected to do some of this health education. We talked about one time when I was here, the way that some teachers would integrate health into other subjects. This is a concentrated effort, and yet the reading levels are really high in inappropriate areas and then very low in other subjects. So Quaver Ed is just a very strange product for an audience that I think is meant to make money for the company, but I doubt that it would deliver the health results that any of you were looking for when you approved these TEKS.
What about the ability of the teacher to take the TEKS and develop their own without an extra set resource? I mean, they wouldn't really need, because some of it is a very low, eating right and that sort of thing would be. Is it really necessary to have a text?
If they purchased Quaver, they would obviously want to use it because they've spent all this money on it. Do I think that the TEKS could be implemented in the classroom by the teachers? I guess. I'm not actually for a lot of the robust comprehensive standards that were adopted. But I don't see it taking that much work. You don't need 5 days of head lice in kindergarten and 5 days of head lice in grade 1 for your one student expectation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, I just think that it's really excessive, and I could see with the games and the songs and the movement that's involved in Quaver, how it would cost that much. I can see why the price is very high. I had not really thought of that. But again, it's the only one that was introduced K through 5 and that has made it through the process this far. And yet it's invasive surveys and journaling, private teacher chats, all inappropriate.
Okay, any other questions? Ms. Hardy, is that good? Any other questions from members? All right, I want to thank the 4 of you, and we'll call the next 4.